Hartford 911, what's your emergency?
My daughter is blue. I went to wake her up, and I just got home from lunch, and she won't wake up. Oh my God.
Okay.
After wrapping up her incredibly successful freshman year in college, Jessie came back to Hartford, Wisconsin to live with her parents for the summer. She was often writing original music with her friend Dan Bartelt, who was also a very talented local musician. Or when she wasn't doing that, she was rehearsing at the Shower Arts Center, where that summer she had auditioned for and landed a central role in that summer's musical, The Fiddler on the Roof. Jessie was the fiddler. The musical opened to a packed house on Friday, July 12th at 7:30 p.m., and Jessie and the rest of her cast were incredible. Jessie and the rest of her castmates headed off to another cast member's house who had a pool, and they had a big pool party. Jessie would finally leave the party and get back to her parents' house sometime after midnight. The next morning, Buck and Joy got up fairly early, around 7 a.m., and Jessie, she stayed in bed. At around noon, Joy would leave her office and head back home for her lunch break. And so when she walked into her home, she was expecting to see Jessie awake. But when she walked inside, the house was silent. Jessie was not downstairs. She apparently was not awake. She opens the door up. Jessie's still in bed, and so Joy runs over to her to jostle her awake. But as soon as she is standing right above the bed, right over her daughter, and she has a clear look down at her daughter's face, she freezes. Moments later, she would call 911.
Hartford 911, what's your emergency?
My daughter is blue. I went to wake her up, and I just got home from lunch, and she won't wake up.
She's
oh my
19.
God.
Okay, so is she breathing?
I don't think so, no. Her pants are all wet, and she's got, it looks like strangulation marks.
There are strangulation marks?
That's what it looks like. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on.
Joy would gently pull her daughter out of the bed and lay her down on the ground. She would put a pillow underneath her head, and then she would begin doing chest compressions to try to save her daughter's life. But it was already too late. When police and paramedics arrived moments later, they came into the bedroom and they quickly determined that Jessie was deceased. The police on scene quickly concluded that this was not a naturally occurring death. This was not a suicide. This was a homicide. The police also noted that there was no sign of forced entry anywhere in the house, and it appeared nothing in the house was stolen. The killer knew Jessie and targeted Jessie. That they would have known where she was in the house, they knew how to get in the house, and they went straight for her, they killed her. Joy would point out to the detective that the night before, when Jessie came home, she had seemed really upset about something. She had said it was about these two guys that, were hitting on her at the party, and it made her uncomfortable, but Joy and Jessie didn't really get into it. So there was something obviously on her mind the night that she was killed. Detective Thickens found them, and he very quickly ruled out one of them, but he was not able to rule out the other. His name was Randy Talley. When Detective Thickens spoke to Randy, Randy would tell him that after the party, he went back to his apartment, and that is where he has been the entire time until right then. When Detective Thickens asked him if there was anyone that could corroborate his story, Randy said no, he was alone in his apartment the entire time. The police were still searching Jessie's bedroom for evidence, and they discovered her diary. And her final entry in this diary only made Randy seem more suspicious. After Jessie had spoken with her mom briefly when she got back from the party, she had gone up to her room and then made this final diary entry. And in it, she talks about being really upset about what these two guys had done to her. She said that these two guys were corrupting her and that they were taking what should be platonic love and perverting it into a competition. Her closing lines seemed to indicate that she might have been expecting some sort of future confrontation with these two guys. The lines read, "I am not helpless. I will recognize problems and confront them without fear. God be with me." Randy quickly became the primary suspect in this murder investigation. But Randy's cell phone records indicated that he had not had any interaction, no calls, no text messages, with Jessie leading up to her death. And around the time in the morning of July 15th, when she would have been killed, Randy's cell phone was in his apartment, far away from Jessie's house. Just 24 hours after Jessie was discovered, the police would get a huge lead. 3 days before before Jesse was killed, a young woman about the same age as Jesse, named Melissa Richards, decided to take her dog for a walk in a park in Richfield, Wisconsin. She noticed there was only one other car parked in this lot. It was this blue minivan, and she noticed the driver had their legs poking out of the driver's side window, as if they were laying down across the front seats. And so Melissa does a 30-minute loop. She gets all the way around and she reaches the entrance to the parking lot, and she sees the blue minivan is still parked where it was, and this person is sitting there staring at Melissa. And so Melissa, she makes quick eye contact with this person and immediately averts her gaze. She hears the sound of someone running towards her from behind. And so she whips her head around and she sees the same person has run up to her. And as soon as she turned around to face this person, they came to a complete stop. And Melissa kind of reflexively said, "Oh, you scared me." And then Melissa just turned her back on this person and continued walking towards her vehicle. And after taking only a couple of steps, once again, she heard the sound of this person behind her start running towards her. And immediately she whips her head around again. She looks down, and in this person's right hand, by their hip, is a knife. A split second later, this person charges Melissa. They tackle Melissa to the ground. Melissa smashes down onto her stomach, and she's pinned on her stomach. And this person, they attempt to stab Melissa, but Melissa fights back like mad. She turns over and she grabs the blade of the knife, and she wrestles it away from her attacker, and she pulls the knife under her body, and she puts it under all of her weight. And the attacker is so surprised that this has happened, they actually stop for a second before kind of reaching down and trying to yank the knife out from underneath Melissa, but Melissa is not letting it go. And so finally the attacker just kind of sits up on her back and says, "Can I just go?" And Melissa says, "No." But at that exact moment, the attacker leapt up and started running back towards the blue minivan. Melissa runs to her car, she leaps inside, and she sees her attacker in the van peeling out of the lot driving away. She knew exactly what her attacker looked like, and she knew everything about the vehicle. And so Detective Klossing releases this sketch and the information to the media, and he puts it around town, and someone would come forward. One day after Jesse had been killed, a deputy from the Washington County Sheriff Department, he came forward and said, "Hey, I saw your flyer and I have seen that vehicle parked in the exact same spot in that park." He would discover they had a relative that matched exactly the description that Melissa gave of her attacker. Detective Klossing tracks down the phone number of the relative who looks exactly like the attacker, and he punches that number into his cell phone, and he put the phone to his ear. At the same time, Buck and Joy Blodgett were hosting a vigil for their daughter in their home. And so all of Jesse's very close friends and family, they were all there in the living room. A phone starts to ring inside of the circle. And the owner of that phone, 19-year-old Daniel Bartelt, who was a very close friend of Jesse's and who had spent much of that summer coming over to the Blodgett household to make original music with Jesse, he stands up and he walks quietly away from the group, and then he answers the phone, and it's Detective Klossing. Daniel would make his way to the police station that afternoon, and he would be interviewed by Detective Klossing and another detective. And even though they had brought Daniel in to talk to him about Melissa Richards, it was not lost on these detectives how strange it was that Daniel is at the home of a recently murdered young woman where that case is unsolved, and he is now the suspect of another attack on another young woman that happened only a couple of days earlier and only a couple of miles away. And so as soon as Daniel sits down, Detective Klossing kind of casually asks him, "Hey, why were you at Jesse Blodgett's house when I called you?" And Daniel would say, "Well, I'm very close with Jesse, and so we were there as part of her vigil because she was killed yesterday." And so the detective kind of did gradually shift to Melissa Richards, which Daniel would say he had nothing to do with. Detective Klossing and the other detective noticed that there were cuts on Daniel's hands. And so they kind of cut him off, and they asked Daniel, "How'd you get these cuts on your hands?" And Daniel was very quick to say, "Well, I got them at work. A screw kind of jutted out and cut my hands. I move inventory around in a back room of an engineering company. That's my job. And, I just cut my hand at work." One of the detectives just says to Daniel, "If I were to call your employer, this engineering company, would they say you, Daniel, are currently employed with them?" And Daniel, he kind of paused for a minute and then said, "No, I actually lost my job several weeks ago." And And so now the detectives knew he had to be lying about how he cut his hand. And so Detective Clausen kind of leans in and says, Daniel, so how'd you really hurt your hand? And so Daniel, he begins talking about how he cut it cooking. And Detective Clausen is like, Daniel, nobody would lie about cutting their hand cooking. So why don't you just tell us the truth? And amazingly, Daniel would. He would admit, after some serious pressure, that he hurt himself attacking Melissa Richards. He was just feeling kind of scared of life. That's how he described it. And so he wanted somebody else to feel scared too. And so that was why he said he attacked Melissa. But despite admitting to this vicious, violent crime against Melissa Richards, Daniel, when asked if he had any connection to the Jesse Blodgett murder, he would say, absolutely not. I love Jesse. I would never hurt her. But when Detective Clausen reached out to Detective Thickens of the Hartford Police, it would quickly come to light that Daniel was lying again. Daniel was raised in a good, loving family. I mean, this was a kid who had everything going for him. But something went wrong with Daniel. Daniel had become obsessed with killing and death and murder. His internet search history shows that he spent a lot of time looking for actual videos online. And he was especially interested in anybody who killed lots and lots of women. And then finally, right before he would attack Melissa, Daniel, based on his search history, had discovered this one particular film, and it was of this woman who was all tied up and hogtied, and after being assaulted, she was strangled. And Daniel watched this video over and over and over and over again. On that day, July 12th, as Daniel is pretending to be at work, he's sitting in his car, he looks out and he sees Melissa, she's all alone, and something clicks in his head where he decides he's going to go reenact that wretched film on Melissa. 3 days later, it's believed that Daniel decided he wanted to try again. He needed his victim to be totally helpless. He needed his victim not to fight back. And who better than 19-year-old Jesse Blodgett, his close friend who inherently trusted him and would easily let him into her house, into her bedroom. It wouldn't matter if she was all alone because she felt safe around him. It's believed Daniel arrived in the driveway of the Blodgett household just a few minutes after Buck and Joy had left for work. After she was deceased, Daniel attempted to clean her body with some alcohol wipes. Then Daniel rounded up all of his murder supplies back into his bag, except he did accidentally leave one of those special rolls of tape underneath Jesse's bed. And then he slipped out of the Blodgett household, and then he drove to Woodlawn Park, where he disposed of his supplies into one of the trash cans. The next day, at Jesse's vigil, Daniel would attend, and according to the other people that were there, Daniel was by far the most talkative person in that circle. Daniel would ultimately be found guilty of murdering Jesse Blodgett, although he never admitted guilt. In fact, during the sentencing phase, Buck Blodgett would give this incredibly eloquent and heart-wrenching speech. And toward the end of this speech, Buck turned to his right and he looked directly at Daniel. And Daniel looked back at him. And Buck says, Dan, I forgive you as I have every day since I found out it was you. And then a few moments later, Buck would also say to Dan, Dan, not only do I forgive you, but I love you. But when Daniel got his turn to stand up and say something on his behalf, he turned to face Buck and Joy, and looking right at them, he would tell them that he's innocent and that he doesn't have any answers for them because he didn't do it and his conscience is clear. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and as far as we know, he still denies having killed Jesse despite the mountain of evidence against him. In the days following Jesse's death, Buck and his family decided they had to do something to honor their daughter's memory and maybe even change the world, which was something that Jesse always talked about wanting to do. And so Buck would go on to start the Love is Greater Than Hate project, which is this incredible charity whose mission is designed to end male on female violence and to inspire love over hate.